Hello, everybody. Welcome back to HavoKast. Today, we're going to be talking about season 3 of Seinfeld, one of my favorite shows, if not my favorite show of all time. Definitely my favorite sitcom by far. We talked about season 1 and 2 already. Season 1 and 2 was kind of the setup to the broader Seinfeld universe, I guess, if you will, where the first two seasons, everybody kind of is filling out their role, figuring out who they are, getting their looks, getting their their level of acting and their chemistry right. And then season, 2 towards the end and a few episodes, they have a couple of really, okay, this is really more Seinfeld than it was before. And it feels a little more settled in. Season 3 is just kind of off to the races. They have a lot of great episodes, a lot of iconic bits. And, you could just really tell the characters are feeling comfortable in their roles. I like this season because it sets up a very subtle but effective style of humor that they're going to use for the next few seasons. There's going to be a lot of callbacks, a lot of relatable moments, and it just kind of sets up again like jokes they can call back on, of course. But I don't even know if they knew they were going to go there. They had a lot of great writers and a lot of great talent on the actual show, so it was just kind of like, we gotta use what we have. And essentially they had a lot of great jokes to return back to, and they're season 7, I know they have a really good callback to an episode here. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then some of the recurring characters and things like that, but the themes they explore too actually get rediscovered and brought back up kind of in the future seasons as well. So I like season 3. It's not a very famous season. I think people look at the individual episodes in here and think they're some of the greatest of all time. But the overall season has a lot of those moments and a lot of those shows. So I think it's kind of like, it's just not as out there. It's not as broad and bombastic as some of the future seasons. So it's not as memorable, but still really good and effective when you actually get back and watch it. Again, like I say, subtle but effective humor. And that's my favorite kind, where it's not thrown in your face. You just kind of have to think about it or pick up on something. It makes you, like, if you go back and rewatch these, you'll pick up like a look that somebody gives, or the way two characters interact, or something you didn't notice before. I love just leaving that to the audience, But that's enough of the setup. We'll kind of get into these episodes as we go. We're ranking S through F. This is going to be, S tier is, top of the line. It's iconic. It's funny. I love it. I could revisit it anytime. A is kind of the same, but probably just not as solid all the way through. B is like, it's good. It's solid. I can watch it. I'm probably not laughing the whole time, or, maybe it's on in the background. C tier is like, okay, there's some good bits, but it's still just, to me, not at that same level that, these are. D, there might be a moment here or there, but it's just not there for me. And then F is something I just skip. There's only a couple of episodes I would really truly skip, but definitely there are some moments throughout the franchise where I could do without those episodes. We got 22 episodes in here to rank, and just like with everything, ranking is very subjective, so please, if you disagree or have some great moments I missed, or, episodes you really like that I didn't like as much, there's no problem with that. Feel free to discuss them. I love talking about that kind of stuff. We did like James Bond ranking and Iron Maiden ranking and stuff like that, the Metallica ranking, and there's a lot of different opinions on those things, and I love that because that's how it should be. That's what's the mark of a good show and a good band. It's not catering to just one type of, personality, one type of feel. It just hits like a genre of them, like it feels like this powerful music, or it's feeling like this kind of comedy, that kind of comedy, or this kind of setup, that kind, when it comes to feels about Seinfeld, though, I will say something I do love about this show is that there is only one true goal, and that's to make people laugh and to be relatable. There's not like that one, fault of many sitcoms, especially nowadays, where they have to, make people feel something. I think that's something I love about Always Sunny, is that it's been going on for such a long time, but they have not added that truly dramatic element to it. It's just a funny show. I think that's something that I really did not care for much with Friends, is that, you'd watch it and then a couple of episodes into a season, you'd have to feel some kind of dramatic story arc along top of just, laughing. So, somebody's not feeling a relationship, or, somebody's sad about something, or somebody's going to move. And it's just always very, you got 30 minutes to deliver some jokes. So if you're going to spend those 30 minutes, setting up a sad thing, and then you hit somebody with a joke, it just doesn't feel as right, But that being said, we're just going to get into this ranking. We're going to go for it. And the note is season 3, episode 1. One of my favorite episodes of all time. It is, especially for the time, very, just groundbreaking things they're exploring, and not in like a rude way. So I know George was like, he was very concerned about sexuality and stuff like that. But no other character was really like making fun of him for it or anything. And it wasn't like a huge topic, which is something I like about Seinfeld. I mean, there's definitely some themes that are kind of like past their times. And, I think the world is kind of strayed away from it a little bit. But at the same time, they don't do it in a way where it feels like, oh, man, it's hard to watch. I mean, even some of the James Bond films, like there's some stuff that's hard to watch, even though I love the franchise. And I'll admit that any day. But this one, it's a lot more palatable. And it looked like it was almost kind of progressive in a way without being too in your face about it. And they do a good job of offering both sides too, which is what I like. The note is interesting because George gets a massage from a man, and just, it's such a hilarious scene. And then everything after that is so funny as well. This season also kind of started the individual story for each character. So they all kind of had a little role that they were independent of each other, and somehow they kind of weaved the stories together at the end. This one, George, Jerry get notes to kind of bypass having to pay for massages. They get one for Elaine also, even though she doesn't need one. And then because she doesn't need one, it ends up looking like some kind of insurance fraud or something on the dentist friend that they're getting notes from. And so, on one hand, you got George questioning everything and, trying to figure out a lot of iconic lines. I think It Moved is one of the most iconic lines and scenes. And then that leads up to Kramer and George kind of having this weird little fun interaction where, George says, I'm not even I don't like to use urinals. I'm not even a stall man, to kind of say he's getting privacy from other men. And Kramer does this double take in the middle of a conversation and then kind of revisits it. It's just so great. One of those subtle pickups. Like I say, all the actors are kind of firing on all cylinders right now. They all have great chemistry, and just moving forward, it looks fresh. It looks very fun to be part of this show. And I like that they're having a good time with it. Every actor is just, bright. I like it a lot. But yeah, the note, really funny all the way through. I could watch this anytime. It's so good. Like I say, they all got notes, and then, the dentist ends up getting audited, and this just makes for some really, really great scenes. That being said, we are moving on to the next episode, which is The Truth. And I will put that at a strong B. It's a pretty good episode. It's a little frustrating to watch, which, a lot of these shows, like Curb Your Enthusiasm is a great one too, where, you just kind of sit there and you're like kind of cringing at it because it's almost something you've either been through or could see you going through. So again, it's really relatable humor, but it's just George tells the truth to his girlfriend that he's breaking up with, and she is coincidentally helping Jerry get through an audit that Kramer has put him in. And he was only doing it to impress Elaine with some fraudulent charity when they were dating back in the day. So the whole thing has this weird little path of intertwining. But, it starts a domino effect, which is cool because a lot of these shows going forward will have domino effect kind of things. And that principle of one thing leads to another, which I thought was a very underutilized concept in a lot of shows. But also this one, it was very subtle. So, they probably had that premise all along, and it's just harder to notice, I guess. But so he breaks up with the girl. The girl throws out all of Jerry's audit papers and isn't going to help him anymore. She ends up having a breakdown from it, and just a couple of really funny scenes in this one. And the acting, again, it's what they're not saying more than what they are saying. It's so good. But there's a lot of moments in here where I'm just like, I know someone just like this. It drives me crazy, or, whatever. So that might be more of a personal thing than anything, but it's a good one. I could watch it. I enjoy watching this one. Sometimes I'll have it on in the background as opposed to being the focal point of the night, but it's still a good one. Now we're getting into a very interesting and unique kind of episode. So the Chinese restaurant back in season 2, I believe, Kramer is not there. And it's the first episode where I think one of those main characters is just completely missing. I know the first episode, the pilot, didn't have Elaine, but again, that first season was just kind of figuring things out. But this episode, season 3, episode 3. They go down to Florida, Jerry and Elaine. There's no George, no Kramer at all, which normally, I mean, Kramer is obviously a staple of the show. George is absolutely hilarious. George was so underrated, such an underrated character for so long because Kramer stole the show. But revisiting, it's just amazing. The movements, the subtleties, everything that George does in this show is so good. So you'd think like, okay, you're taking out these two characters, it's going to be tough. But Jerry's parents are awesome. Again, this was very relatable to my parents and me. Not necessarily for me to my parents, but they, had lived with family that had moved to Florida, and we had been to Florida a bunch of times, so we kind of saw this like retirement community thing as well, and just how people acted down there. And it's just so funny because they're saying what everybody was thinking at the time too, just about how people acted down there. And it's like, oh well, you have nothing to do when you retire, so you just kind of lose your mind a little bit. And I feel like that's very true, especially being in the position I'm in now where I don't work anymore. I'm just streaming and creating YouTube stuff at this point. Not that I ever wanted to, but sidebar for a second, it was just something that kind of happened, and I was like, all right, well, I lost a job, let's just keep doing this. And so it's kind of the same deal, where you have this routine for years, and then you're just out of the routine suddenly, and you just don't know what to do with yourself. So that's kind of what they were exploring up there. But the premise is, again, Jerry and Elaine are down in Florida visiting his parents, and there's like I want to say it's a ceremony for his dad, and so his dad has a couple friends come over, and Jerry's talking about this special pen that the friend has, and it writes upside down all this stuff. He's like, oh, that's really cool. The guy offers the pen, and Jerry takes it, but they were just like, it's just so funny, the dichotomy here, because the mom is upset that he took the pen. The dad is like, oh, it was a gift. Why wouldn't he take it? And there's just all this arguing and chaos and everything, and just so many little things happen. It's such a great episode. There's nothing that really, to me, stands out as like, oh, this is literally one of the best scenes, but it's just so solid all the way through, despite not having two incredibly role-playing, pivotal characters. I think they did a really masterful job on this one, and it breaks the norm because a lot of times Seinfeld's kind of set around the same, it's New York, it's the same setting, the same restaurant, the same attitude. You're in a whole different environment in this Florida one, though. But we're going to move on to a very low point in the series and a low point in the season, and that is the dog episode. I cannot stand this one. And this is one that is definitely F tier for me. It is a skippable one. I think that, the main premise is that this guy meets Jerry on a plane, and he's not feeling well, so they have to take him to the hospital, but he has a dog, so Jerry has to take care of the dog. He offers to, or something like that. The dog is just annoying, doesn't stop barking and destroying stuff. It cancels plans because Jerry has to watch him. Elaine doesn't want him to go to a shelter because, the owner's clearly just kind of taking a vacation from the dog for a little bit, kind of milking that time. And it, just a whole bunch of things happen. It's Seinfeld. There's a couple of good lines and some things here and there, but for the most part, it's just a very intolerable episode. I mean, just the nonstop barking. I hate dogs barking, and this episode is just mostly that. It's what I focus in on, unfortunately, and I hate the guy that pawns the dog off. I think that whole thing just kind of drives me crazy. We all know people like that just have responsibilities that they won't actually take care of, and it's always somebody else's responsibility to be the person to step in, and it's just, I don't know, that kind of stuff hits a little too close to home. So for me, that episode is just an always skippable. I think it's literally probably my least favorite in the entire series. Maybe there's another one here or there that kind of rivals it, but it's not even background noise for me. It's more of a distraction than anything. But following that, mostly what feels like a filler episode to another just standout iconic. This is one of the most iconic episodes in the franchise for sure, but the library is so good. And the guy who plays Bookman, the library cop, is just excellent. He is on point. Jerry cannot control his laughter throughout any scene. George running into his old gym teacher, and then we get the flashbacks and stuff. It's just so good. It's very well written. It takes place in a couple of different settings, but yet they all work together very well. And, just coincidence after coincidence and things like that. But, the main premise is the library's cracking down on delinquent books, and Jerry took one out in his high school days, let George borrow it, never got it back, never delivered it. Jerry's got this hazy memory, doesn't remember anything about it. So it's just another one of those where, like, you've definitely talked to people where they think they just remember everything spot on and they know exactly what happened at, certain points, and they're just completely wrong. So this is kind of in that same vein, but there's just so many good monologues and, the back and forths, and again, just the characters. Their subtle acting is just so good. Kramer ends up dating the librarian that works there, and that's really funny too, because she has all this poetry she wants to publish, and Elaine works at a publishing house, so naturally Kramer's like, oh well, let's publish the poetry, and it just it does not work out well. So again, a domino effect of just thing after thing happening. I love the way they set that up, and this episode is it's one that you'll see on TV more than others for sure. And there's a lot of great ones, so that's saying something. All right, we are going to pick this up now with the parking garage, and this one is a very interesting episode because it's very much like the Chinese restaurant. This one, I'm going to put it like a high B. I really like it a lot. I just don't think it lives up to an A or an S, because it's another one of those iconic, like, everybody's been there. You're in a parking garage or a parking lot. You have no idea where you parked, and, you're just looking for the car, especially in some of those larger cities and parking garages and things. Here in Las Vegas, there's a couple of places that I've never experienced this on a big level until I lived here, and there's a couple of hotels where it just makes no sense. Especially those side-by-side hotels where the parking garage is either shared or they line up so that they can drive into one another. It's just, there's been so many times where this has happened. So very relatable. So this is an interesting one where it's one location, like the Chinese restaurant was, but all four characters are there and they all have something different going on. So, throughout the whole episode, Elaine's worried about her fish that she got at the mall. George is worried about getting to his parents on time for their anniversary. Jerry's he's just uncomfortable because I think he has to use the bathroom, and then Kramer's there. He's just there. There's a couple of great deleted scenes too, where you can see them like filming certain scenes in this, especially when they're trying to start the car at the end of the episode, and like Kramer hits his head and stuff, and they just keep some stuff in there. It's so funny. But, the different characters they run into, different scenes, and then they kind of go through like almost like a comedy routine, but visual comedy, where it's like, oh, this person parks like an ass. These people don't, care about anybody. This other person's weird. This George insults a Scientologist. I mean, it's just like there's all kinds of funny things that happen and just random things that happen in here. So like I say, very solid episode all the way through. It's very iconic. It's not one where I'm going to be like, just dead laughing or something that you'll see on, like a TikTok reel or Revisited or anything like that. But it is still really, really good and really fun to watch. Next we have The Cafe. And here's where we get a recurring character. Babu Bhatt is the owner of the cafe. And this one's good. I like this one. I have it at C. Only because to me, I watch it, I like it, I enjoy it. But there's never I'm not dying to watch it ever. I think there are parts that are, especially when his cafe goes out of business and stuff, it hurts a little too much, It's just one of those where you're like, oh, God. And then the IQ test thing is funny. So Elaine has to take an IQ test for George because George thinks he's an idiot, so he's not going to be able to pass the IQ test. Elaine is very like, oh, I could do this. I got a brilliant IQ, I have a high IQ. I could do this whole thing. And so he passes it out the window. She takes it to the cafe. It's just completely destroyed when, she brings it back and ends up getting a horrible score on the IQ test. So that was really funny. But she, is talking about distractions and things like that. So they do a retest on it. George is really embarrassed about that. And then, Kramer's had this jacket. So again, we revisit the continuity stuff. Kramer's had this jacket that he got from, I believe, like his mom's ex or something that got locked up in prison. He gets let out, and then she ends up taking the test, and Elaine takes the test in Jerry's apartment. Kramer gets locked in the apartment with her because the guy's like looking for him to get the jacket back, and it's just a whole mess. But while all that's happening, Jerry is obsessed with the owner of this cafe and trying to help him run his business. Iconic lines in there again, like, you know, when he ends up suggesting that Babu Bhat turns his restaurant into a Pakistani-only food, it starts going out of business, even though it was already failing business. But he took it out on Jerry and was very mad about the suggestion and everything like that. So he went from being a very good man and a very smart man to being a very bad man, and it's very funny. But again, the whole flow of the episode to me is just like, got to be in the mood. It's one of those that I can definitely get into. It's probably a high C, but still one of those that I'm not like super into. Which is funny because this is filled with like high highs and then like not low lows, but this season's definitely filled with very high points and then like kind of mid-high points, I guess. And this one is going to be a high point. The tape is so good. This one, I think, is one of the best, like, roller coasters that they all kind of go through. And it centers around literally just Elaine leaves a message for Jerry on a tape. And it's a very, like, suggestive message and everything. And Jerry gets this big ego, big head about it. Elaine acts like, you know, oh, I was just, you know, be messing around. Nobody even knows. But she tells George, and then George gets this, like, massive crush on Elaine. So the way he's acting towards her is so funny the whole way through. And he's also looking for, like, a cure for baldness through this. And that's funny because the cream smells really bad. So he has to, you know, put it on and take it off and all this when he thinks Elaine's coming over or not. It's just whole lot of situations that happen, but a very, very funny episode, and one that, again, like the subtleties of the actors, they're all just so in the zone here. I mean, George is just, acting so well in this. You know, the eye movements, the frantic, like, oh, Elaine's coming over, I better get ready, you know, and nobody knows why he's acting like that. Kramer has a tape recorder too, so he's taking videotapes, everything, and there's just so many great scenes lined up with this. It's one of those that just does not stop. And you'll watch it the first time and say, like, oh, that was pretty good. And then you watch it the second time and you're like, oh, they did that because of that. Or like, I see why that's so like this. So it kind of makes a lot more sense on the second time. So good, though. It's really, really funny. We got the nose job episode. That is filled with a lot of really just hilarious parts in it. George is dating a woman that has a larger nose, and, you know, he tries to suggest her getting a nose job. It's a really weird, crazy premise, but at the end, you know, she does it and she's happy with it. And then Kramer's the one who, like, took her to the hospital, so she ends up leaving George for Kramer, and he's got his, like, you know, charm over women, and that's kind of where this develops. But just the bad luck nature of this, or you get what you deserve kind of thing. And again, both sides. So like Elaine's advocating, like, no, you know, she is fine the way she is. And George is like, yeah, but I don't know. And it just, again, the acting from George is so good. Jerry has some great subtle moments in here as well. But Kramer, you know, again, this started another trend of him just kind of saying whatever was on his mind. And, you know, the woman that George is dating is saying at one point, like, hey, I feel like there's so many beautiful women in the city, and I don't really fit in right away. And then Kramer just goes, oh, yeah, you look just as good as any of them. Just need a nose job. And it was just one of those moments where everybody kind of freaked out at the same time. But, yeah, the actual episode is just filled with one-liners and, you know, again, more subtleties and things. This whole season, so good, so underrated. They also have this really interesting part in the episode where Jerry's dating a woman that he has, like, absolutely nothing in common with. And it's just so funny because, you know, there's just this back and forth the whole time where, you know, should I be with her? Should I not? Like, I don't understand what's going on here, this and that. And it's one of those where I think if you have like a crush on somebody, it's like overwhelming. So from the last episode to this one, where you kind of like, oh man, was it just like this instinct or what? There's a lot of interesting little like self-reflective questions that kind of come up with this show, and especially these few episodes in a row. Next, we have The Stranded. This is the 10th episode in the season. Now, this one is, I'm going to put it at D. And there's definitely some good moments. Like the part at the party, there's iconic moments at this party. Some iconic lines and some pretty controversial stuff at the time as well. But at the same time, I don't think iconic lines are going to really necessarily make the whole episode the best. And I cannot stand when the guy comes to visit Jerry. So they're at this house party. Elaine and Jerry are stranded there because George takes some coworker home or something like that. And, bro code, which wasn't even a thing at the time, but they apparently had in this, was like, yo, George, just do your thing. We'll get a ride somehow. And they ended up being there way later than the house party hosts wanted them, which I think we've all been there too, where there's people that are just like, we're all having a good time. And then, it's like, all right, it's been a few hours, like, start wrapping things up. You start cleaning. You start like, all right, let's get this show on the road. Kind of trying to go to sleep, And there's people that just kind of hang out. You don't want to tell them to get out of here. But it was so funny because the wife was like, I got to get the hell out of here. Like, they need to leave. I got to go to sleep. And the guy was like, he didn't care. He was all aloof, but it's because he's kind of a dick. So, he does some really crazy things when he goes to visit Jerry. Jerry says, thanks for letting us stay here. If you're ever in the city, we'll hang out and I'll make it up to you. So he takes him up on that offer. Another one of those like kind of Curb Your Enthusiasm before Curb Your Enthusiasm things. Like Larry David was writing, obviously. So it's one of those like, well, you offer. You're not necessarily supposed to take it. It's just an offer, And so that's kind of what I felt like. Jerry didn't even really remember the guy at first. But he ends up hanging out with Kramer when he comes to visit Jerry. Jerry had to leave. And, of course, that's a recipe for disaster. So they get into all kinds of trouble. And it's just, that whole part is just, it's funny but frustrating. And then the end of the episode, they have like prostitutes over or something like that. Jerry comes home and he gets slapped with the bill. And it's just like, oh, my God. Just one of those things. But like I say, the actual party was pretty funny. I mean, it's another one of those like, we've all been stuck in conversations. They had the secret code to get them, selves freed from conversations if either one of them was stuck. And we've all been there where somebody just will not stop talking. You're like, all right, we got to get out of this. Like, somebody please help me. So I always thought that was pretty funny for that, just side of it. Like I say, it's a very relatable show, and not everything's going to be relatable, but there's going to be some parts where you can just kind of translate it into modern times and think like, man, that is really a timeless, relatable show. The Alternate Side is the next episode, and this one I think is hilarious. I think it's all the way through just really good. He, at one point, he calls the car phone, and, the carjacker's in there, and he's, like, asking him how to work the car and stuff, and then Kramer leans over and tells him to send his gloves back to, the apartment. Just so many good lines. It's just line after line of ridiculous stuff, but it's so good. The scene in the whole scene in the rent-a-car center is so good. You can take a reservation, you just can't hold the reservation. It's so funny. And then they have this little conversation about, oh, let me go speak to my manager. And then, Jerry and Elaine kind of acted out of what we were all thinking in those situations. So again, just so relatable, so funny, but the show just was really on a high point here. I mean, during this season, this is where I was like, yo, if you look at the top 4 episodes I have up here, the note, the library, the tape, the alternate side, they're not really in any particular order, but these are all so funny, and it's just all the way through. At the end, of course, Kramer has the gloves, and the gloves were delivered to him from the carjacker, so it's one of those little funny, subtle things. The only thing I don't love about this one is Elaine's dating a 66-year-old boyfriend who has like a stroke, and she has to take care of him then, so she's kind of stuck in like an uncomfortable situation like that. And I don't love it because there's just a part where it's just kind of hard to watch, And it's so funny because the like 95% of this episode is incredible. And even the part where she is like dating him and, he comes back after the stroke and is dating somebody else. And, it's just funny because Jerry is told by Elaine in the dealership, the like rent-a-car dealership that, he's like 66 years old and Jerry's just stunned and, he can't believe it. And, she's trying to get him to go up in line and stuff. But there's so many things that are just iconic and funny about that whole part and that whole episode. Like I said, just that one little bit where, she's got to feed him and stuff. It's just tough, from your comedy show to see that kind of thing. It's real life, I know, but it is just tough to watch is all in my opinion. But yeah, so we have that happening. And then, I mean, if that's not enough, on top of all of this, Kramer gets a line in a Woody Allen film for like tripping and falling. And it's "these pretzels are making me thirsty," which is another just freaking iconic line in this series and one that's quoted to this day. He accidentally injures Woody Allen, so he's, not in the movie anymore and this and that. But that sets up some great stuff for the rest of the season and then also for all of next season and the whole story arc and everything like that. So it's really, I mean, we are from this point on getting into like the continuity era of Seinfeld. And it's just so good to watch. I remember talking to my friend about this back in the day, and it was like, season 1 and 2, you can kind of watch and, there's little funny bits here and there and things you can enjoy about it. But you just give it a chance at season 3 and then especially season 4. That'll have you hooked because season 3 is where it's just funny and it starts getting this whole thing set up, this whole universe set up. Season 4 is where they really do something with it, and then it becomes just an incredible show from there on out. But yeah, it is tough to give shows a couple of seasons to get going. Usually you want to hit the ground running, but luckily we had this show and people stuck with it because it was very good. I'm going to go maybe slightly controversial here. The Red Dot episode, I'm going to put in C, like a low C. I am not a huge fan of it. Great acting again. It's very funny. The premise is, Jerry and George were shopping. It's like a Christmas episode kind of, and George got Elaine this sweater on clearance for helping him get a job. She doesn't know it's on clearance. It's like damaged with a red dot. And so it's just a lot of back and forth through them trying to get the truth out of everything. So there's a lot of really subtle, funny moments. Elaine's boyfriend is an alcoholic, and Jerry accidentally doesn't guard the alcoholic drink, so he falls off the wagon and he's an alcoholic again. Kind of destroys his life a little bit until the end of the episode. He turns it all around again. But my problem with this one is there's a lot of things that are just, again, that's the problem with this kind of show. It's like there's stuff that's so frustrating about it that it's almost so frustrating it's not even funny. And George getting fired from his job for sleeping with the cleaning lady just always drives me crazy because it's like, God, why? Why would you do that? Obviously, I understand it's to progress the character and how, big of a loser he is supposed to be in the show, but, he gets fired from it, and there's just some great lines delivered between the boss and George. It's funny. There's definitely some great moments. It's a lot funnier than I think The Cafe and maybe even The Truth, but I just think as an episode, it's not pieced together as well as it could have been, and then there's an interesting part where Jerry kind of breaks out into the comedy routine throughout the show, and the guy that fell off the wagon is actually in his audience heckling him. So usually you don't have that. Usually it's like just bits from the stand-up that they kind of fill in to set up more jokes throughout the show, which is also very interesting because a lot of these shows are based off of either comedy routines or just, it's kind of a comedy routine that could be a routine, but it's written into a show, the premise of observational humor. That's why it's so relatable, because it's observations about life and people. So like I say, this one, it's got some cool things in it, but as far as like the funniest episodes that I could always go back to, I think it's as frustrating as it is funny, which is just, kind of tough for me to get through. Here comes another one where it's like almost like single setting, but they took the single setting and they gave every single character a single setting to be in. So it's like the parking garage, but if every character was in their own individual parking garage here. And that is the subway episode, which I think is very interesting. It's funny. It's not like over the top hilarious, but again, there's a lot of like things in here that's it's cool that they have the different characters go on and do different things with the same kind of premise. Everybody's got to get to a different part of the city or just, near the edge of the city to, either pay a traffic ticket or, go to a job interview. So it's funny, George actually gets in trouble because he, instead of going to a job interview, again, setting up from the previous episode where he lost his job again, to just hanging out with some woman, and she ends up robbing him for $5 or $8 or something like that. And it's just it's so good. The line, the delivery, George is looking pathetic, and then it kind of ties into the end. Kramer is paying all kinds of parking tickets and, violations and stuff, but he ends up gambling and winning. There's just so much continuity within this episode when they're all on the train together and everything. Elaine's supposed to go to a wedding, but again, very progressive in the fact that this show was set in the early 90s. And she was going to a lesbian wedding, but, again, both sides, the person talking to her was kind of like, oh God, what are you talking about? And, Elaine was like, it's not a big deal really. So, kind of showing both sides again, while still being funny. Like I say, it's just such an interesting episode more than anything. I think it's very funny, but I'm almost more interested in just how they pulled it off than anything else. But yeah, it's pretty cool, and definitely a good watch. I think also they're talking about actual baseball in this little scene right here. They're both Mets fans, and I think that's pretty interesting because it's almost time capsule. A lot of this stuff, it's a throwback, but there's nothing that really, there's some pop culture references here and there, and especially guest stars and stuff later on in the show. But with this, they're really talking about baseball during this time, and I thought that was really, really cool. We're going to come on to another weird but funny premise, and this is the Pez dispenser episode. I am probably going to put you could see it. I could see it an A, but I'm going to put it at a high B because I think it's really funny, strong writing all the way through. Again, great acting and everything like that. But Jerry puts a Pez dispenser on Elaine's leg at George's girlfriend's recital, and Elaine can't stop laughing. She ends up having to leave and runs into somebody who she hadn't seen in a while, and there's just this whole spiral out of control from there where they end up having to do an intervention at Jerry's apartment. This guy that they knew was on drugs, and then Kramer kind of pushed him there without even realizing it. So there's just some really funny things in this episode, but a lot of oh, well, you did this and it caused this, and then, well, I didn't mean to do that. That wasn't my fault, from all the characters really. But yeah, it's it all kind of culminates at the end with the intervention, and everybody thinks it's kind of like a party or something, but it's really not, and things are just going out of control from there. So it's just one of those episodes where you just really got to follow along, and that's kind of why I have it at B, because paying attention to it definitely helps out a lot. But I realize that if you're not super invested into the show, or you just want to have something on in the background, you're gonna have no idea what the hell's going on in this. It's something you definitely have to pay attention to. So it's a little different from a lot of these where you can just listen to this and just, it's hilarious. This episode, the suicide, I'm not a huge fan of this one. Again, every one of these episodes has some funny moments in it, but this one just, to me, just is almost more of a filler episode. The squatters' rights kind of thing come up in here, and I think that's kind of funny, the premise. Newman's in here, and Newman, of course, is funny, but they hadn't really developed his character as well as they could have, and the rivalry between Jerry and him yet hasn't been fully realized. So, it's a good one, but it definitely, it doesn't hold my attention the whole way. Elaine is fasting for a procedure, and so, she has this weird dialogue. It's actually funny because when they're in the hospital, George's actual mom, Jason's actual mom, is in that scene too. But Elaine's just on this rant about how she sees all this food, and I just never liked that part. There's a lot of stuff I don't really vibe with on here, and then the fact that he's in a coma, that the guy who tried to kill himself is in a coma, and Jerry's kind of dating his girlfriend, but also afraid that he's going to wake up. So it's just a lot of weird themes and stuff in this one, and I'm just not a huge fan. Like I say, it feels almost like just more filler. There's 22 episodes in this total, 23 if you count the two-parter, but I could totally do without this one. It's not necessarily a D or an F, I mean, where like this episode is almost just more, it angers me more than anything. This episode's just non-existent in my opinion. Stranded is much better, but still, both of these are not like up here. This one, The Fix Up, I would probably put that at a high A, bordering an S tier. There's some great lines in here, and this is the one I was talking about where there's like this iconic kind of callback. George is talking about his ideal woman, and he says he's asking like who this woman is that he's being fixed up with and how it's a problem. And so Elaine tries to fix up her friend. Jerry's trying to fix up George. They're both not supposed to talk about it to each other, but also want to know what's going on. And of course they do. So when they're describing each other to, or when Elaine and Jerry are describing George and Elaine's friend to obviously George and her friend, it's just so funny the way they are describing and the reactions they're getting. George says, is there a pinkish hue in the cheek, like a rosy glow? And so that's a callback to season 7, or it's going to be a callback in season 7 when they're talking about, George's wedding and everything like that and his engagement. But it's just so funny because you get reminded about this scene instantly, and the whole episode is just really, really funny all the way through. I think for me, the only thing that sucks about it is there's like a lot of like build up to those moments. That's just kind of not a ton going on. Also in the Fix Up, there's just not really a lot that goes on in the rest of the episode. I think it's kind of more centering around this one thing, which I don't mind. But I think, the lack of like Kramer, he gives George defective condoms, and that's kind of a big deal. It's one of Kramer's big moments in here, but there's really not a whole lot that Kramer's doing. Not that it matters too much, but I think that would be kind of what holds it back from being an S tier, because if you look at all of these, I mean, every character has something kind of big going on, something very interesting, has an intricate part in the story, which, I mean, Kramer does have a big part in the story, but not him himself having it. So, again, like I say, a lot of it's just build up to their kind of, story together, but it's still really, really good. I love it. I think it's hilarious. Which brings me to another very high point, and not just this season, but the whole series, and that's the boyfriend episode. I'm going to put that up here. I know I'm not really ranking these in any particular order, but this is also one of my favorites of all time, so it's going to go up there. It's a two-parter. It's a little longer, but it's worth every minute. It is just hilarious all the way through. So much is happening. Again, they parallel just observational comedy with like tough situations so well. Where they are kind of mimicking how, like, if a guy was to pick up a woman or ask her out, how he would be and how the friends would react and stuff like that. But instead, it's like this just friendly relationship between two guys. So Keith Hernandez stars in this episode along with the Seinfeld cast, and Jerry's like, oh, that's, one of my favorite ball players. So they have this interaction in the locker room at first to set up the rest of the episode. It's really funny. It's really good. And I think I love the way they interact as far as like who they are personality wise. And George is just firing on all cylinders here. I mean, he's got some great lines, especially in the opening. Just so many things that, raise his eyebrows, and just the reactions Jerry gives off are so great. There's a lot of particularly great scenes in here. Keith is going to ask Jerry to help him move, and everybody's like, what? He's going to, didn't you just meet the guy? Like, how are you going to help him move? Because that's like, kind of the, home run, home base kind of thing for women. But, if you're trying to date a woman, that's what the guy equivalent is, I guess, is what they're getting at. It's just so ridiculous, but so funny. And then, of course, Jerry and Elaine dated in the past. So Elaine is actually going to go on a date with Keith. And the good thing about that, the funny thing about that is Jerry's jealous, but she doesn't know if he's jealous of her dating him or him not hanging out with Jerry to date Elaine. And it just raises a lot of eyebrows. It's just another really funny, just deal in that one. It's a, like I say, a longer episode, but it's just so good. Kramer and Newman have that famous like Keith Hernandez speech with the, parallel to, again, just something else, the JFK assassination of all things, where, they're giving Keith Hernandez some, grief about a game he played or something like that. And then, they got spit on by somebody and they thought it was Keith for years and years, but it turns out to be somebody else from a different angle. And it's just, it's one of the most iconic scenes of any sitcom. So definitely worth a watch. It's one of my favorites of all time. I freaking love it. But we'll get back down to another lower point in the season, another kind of filler episode, which is interesting because this is the limo episode. I think it's pretty solid all the way through, but it's more of a low point kind of solid. So they are all kind of going to the same place, and it takes place in a limo. George and Jerry pretend to be somebody that didn't get on his flight, and it ends up going to some neo-Nazi rally or something, but they had no idea. And in the limo, they have a couple like people that are working for the guy, and they don't know any better because nobody's ever seen him. He's like a recluse, but he wrote a couple of like strong books and stuff like that. So Kramer and Elaine are trying to figure out why they're being so weird about everything. And they were all going to go to like a basketball game next to the rally. So, just the way they kind of weave it together works, but it's just one of those where there's not a ton of like really excessively funny parts in it. Some good moments here and there, but for the most part, it's just kind of like, it feels like a filler episode. It feels like, especially the scene we're in. We were obviously in the parking garage the whole time with a Chinese restaurant in another episode, but it works because, that's an actual setting. Being in a limo for most of the episode is just kind of tough. There's not a whole lot of room to really work with, I feel like. So for me, it just doesn't work well atmospherically either. But, some people like the episode. I'm just not a huge fan of it. And we will move on to, I want to see how many more we had, but we only have these right here. I have the whole like season mapped out down there. I went on the tier list maker and found all of this. So we're going to probably do these from now on this way, I believe. It just takes a little time to set up, but it's not a big deal. Anyway, another episode that I'm not a huge fan of is the Good Samaritan. And this one, it's tough to say. I'd probably, bordering on a lower C, maybe a D. I'll probably put it at a lower C. There's good moments in it, good acting. It's a fun, Jerry and Elaine have this little back and forth about lying and stuff like that, and I think it's kind of funny how they have this like back and forth where, we've caught each other in a lie. Now let's expose each other. And it's just the subtle way they kind of do it, but then they elevate it. It's not to the point of like, people freaking out or anything like that, but just the like, oh, I got you. No, I got you kind of moment it's pretty fun. It's not my favorite, but it's pretty fun for sure. I think also this is just weird part where like Kramer has seizures every time he hears Mary Hart's voice on TV, and so that plays a little bit of a role towards the end of the episode as well. The person that Jerry's dating has hit a car and run, and Jerry was going to confront her but didn't realize that he actually wanted to date her, and so that's kind of where the whole premise starts and ends. Basically, is like, oh well, I told everybody that I confronted this person and that I did my good deed, but I really didn't. And then so Jerry's trying to smooth things over with the person that had the car that was hit, who is somebody Jerry's also wanted to date for a while. She doesn't believe that he's just trying to smooth things over. So it's just a whole like, lost in translation kind of mess. They kind of move on pretty quick from that whole like scene where they kind of caught each other in lies. And that's why it kind of drags a little bit towards the end. But, just kind of some funny twists and turns here and there. Again, nothing like super standout. That's why it's down here. I think for me personally, like, see, these are the ones I can kind of have on, but I'm not paying attention to super hard. You know what I mean? The Letter is, I like this episode a lot. I think it's going to border BA kind of territory. It's not the best, but it does have the Kramer picture painted in it, which that whole scene is great. A lot of little back and forth between Kramer and Jerry's girlfriend at the time, who was an artist and just, trying to make a living painting different exotic things. And George is kind of like pressured by himself into buying a painting. And so, that's just a really funny thing that, especially this day and age where there's so many people, myself included, I guess, where we all offer services and things like that. And you don't want anybody to feel pressured into buying your stuff, but sometimes your friends are kind of like, oh man, do I have to do this? Do I have to buy something from him? Like I feel like whenever I'm offering, editing or emotes or whatever I do, just on the side, I always feel like people are feeling pressured into getting something from me. It's never the case. I don't care either way. But also, I think that's where George is coming from when he goes to the artist's house. Like I said, there's a lot of eye rolls on here. And I'm not talking about like bad moment eye rolls. I'm talking about like the characters are actually rolling their eyes, which just, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's just it's a thing that is subtle humor, but in a big way, because it's just like they go out of their way to show it. But it's one of those things where if you don't notice it, it won't be egregious, and you're not forced to notice it really either without it being too subtle. It's just, I don't know. It's one of those things where you just have to watch the whole episode. It makes a lot of sense, but I love the way they do it. They all end up going to a baseball game, which is funny because so many things happen, and Elaine's like getting out of work. Or I don't know if it was work. Actually, you know what? She was getting out of her boss's son's like bris or something like that. And so she pretended like she was going to visit her dad in Baltimore, but really the Orioles were in New York playing the Yankees, and so she went to the game. So just, she ends up getting on the front page because Kramer gets hit in the head with a baseball. It's just all kinds of stuff has to happen in this one. But, they're asked to leave, and just I'm doing a horrible job of telling the story of this episode because there's so much that happens in it, but it's really good. I like it a lot. I think it's very funny all the way through. The only reason it's not higher is just because it's so silly at times. It's just kind of so ridiculous, but it does have a lot of that relatable, like, boy, you tell one little white lie that won't hurt anybody and you get put on the front page of the, the newspaper or whatever. And it's just kind of how like today's society is, if you're not just constantly being careful, somebody's going to plaster you all over the internet. You know what I mean? So, and even if you are careful, even if it's just having a good time, sometimes it gets done like that. So anyway, that's just kind of one of those things. And, we're getting close to the end of this season. Parking space. The parking space is an interesting one because it's one of those that's set kind of in the same setting. And a lot of things are happening in a very small space. So, there's a fight on. Jerry and everybody's going to be watching the fight in Jerry's apartment. Elaine and George go to a flea market but don't invite Kramer, so Kramer's upset about that. They're on the way back, and, George kind of wrecks the car. They both blame each other, even though George was driving. So Elaine just kind of makes up a story about that whole thing, and, Jerry kind of buys it at first, but then doesn't buy it later. Kramer's upset that they didn't invite him, so, he's kind of like giving them the cold shoulder, George and Elaine. But then Kramer also told Jerry that the friend they invited over to Jerry's house to watch the fight, thinks Jerry's kind of a phony. So Jerry's giving that guy the cold shoulder and kind of mad about that. A lot of little back and forth in this one. A lot of things you got to pick up on. But the whole premise set aside is that the friend of Kramer that's coming over to watch the fight is trying to take a spot head first. George is trying to take the same spot by backing up. And they're just at the stalemate. And then the whole city's like divided on it. So people come by, the police come by, customers from a store come by, neighbors come by, and everybody's taking a side like, well, no, head first guy was right, or, backing in guy is right, or this is how you do it, that's how you do it. It's just all this stuff, and it ends up taking all day. Nobody ends up watching the fight except Jerry. I think he tuned in a little too late before it ended, but It's just one of those where, again, you got to kind of be invested in the whole thing and watch the whole thing. I just was never a huge fan of, they set up this character in the future that's their friend. I wasn't a huge fan of him or the way he acted in this. It was kind of funny, but also it gets old fast how, you got the short-tempered like George already. So adding another short-tempered guy that kind of is George, playing off each other is just, it just doesn't work for me as well. But, the premise isn't bad. It's a fun episode to watch. Just got to be in the mood for it is all. And that brings us to our finale here, which is a good episode. I'd probably put it maybe middle here. So this is probably how I would rank these. I might move some stuff around, but The Keys is the last episode, and it's mostly just to wrap up this season and then set up next season. So Kramer's got the acting bug from his time in the Woody Allen, set. It's, again, a callback to earlier, but then also it sets up all of next season. And then Kramer's also abusing his privilege to have Jerry's house keys. That's set up in the beginning. Jerry takes the keys away, and Kramer gets kind of like upset about that. But then he also feels like kind of free and not tethered to them anymore. So he moves to L.A. And when he moves to L.A., he's pursuing a career of acting, which we get to see in the next 2 episodes of it being set up when they go to find him in season 4. It's so good, and I can't wait to talk about that season. It's definitely my favorite. But that kind of starts to spiral out of control of everybody asking for each other's keys back, or, switching keys. So since Kramer doesn't have Jerry's house keys, if he's locked out, which he gets locked out, he needs to get his key from somebody else. So, then they go looking for the key from Elaine. Elaine's not home, so they kind of have to just use George's Elaine spare key to break in there. They find a screenplay that she was working on. So just a lot of like intrusive thoughts winning and a lot of things that had to go right. But it's just, one thing after another. The episode itself, it doesn't have a lot of real substance to it. But there's just some good moments on it. And like I say, most of it is just kind of setting up the next season anyway. So you have to watch it. And that alone, I think, is worth watching it to get it a couple of times. But it's not one of those where you'll be like laughing out loud and thinking like, oh, this is one of the best episodes. Because it's not really like a great episode, but it's not terrible either. It's a good show. If you're going to watch season 4 right after this one, though, you almost have to watch this one and then watch season 4 to make it make sense, unless you've seen it before. And even then, it's always good to kind of roll it in. Like if you got Netflix, just kind of keep those seasons going. Start it on this one and then kind of roll it in. But this is essentially season 3 in a nutshell. Like I say, a lot of callbacks, a lot of continuity in this, a lot of really iconic episodes and parts of episodes, but there are definitely some low points too. I think this is probably a good representation of my ranking, and just kind of where things fit in the arc of season 3, which I guess there wasn't really a real arc yet, but man, season 4, there's a big time story arc. And like I say, it's something that sitcoms hadn't really explored yet. So that'll be fun to talk about next time we do one of these. But yeah, this is kind of where I'm at. If you guys want to talk about what you enjoy about these episodes, or if there's anything that you really loved or hated about these, or think that, some the boyfriend's not that good or something like that, you feel free to talk about it in the comments. I love talking to you guys about all this stuff. And I will see you in the next video, whatever that may be. I'll try to get season 4 out next month or at the end of this month or sometime. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Anyway, thank you all for hanging out. As always, it is a pleasure to do this, and I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day.